there's a race for president of the United States. The current sitting president is running for re-election. 3.5 months from the election, he decides not to run. The sitting vice president then takes the mantle, running against a former president of the United States who had been running for 10 years with 107 days.
People didn't used to get sick of the candidates because you barely ever saw them unless you happened to be standing at the back end of a train. But now we never stop seeing them. The winner in modern elections comes down to who we're less tired of.
Bill Maher just went full fireworks on Kamala Harris, and it was absolute comedy gold. The unapologetic host tore into what critics see as her missteps and disconnect, arguing she's still out of tune with the public mood. Maher's roast was sharp, electric, and downright hilarious. You've got to see it.
When Joe Biden was still hanging on to be the candidate, many of the pundits said that to switch him out this late would cause chaos. Yeah, that was never my position. And indeed, what happened was Kamala Harris said, "Oh, look, I guess it's my turn." And the next day, a grateful nation handed her $500 million. The only reason we stay stuck in permanent campaign mode is money. It's estimated this year that $16 billion will be spent on political ads. It's time we admit that the endless campaign exists only to enrich advertisers, political consultants, and what's left of the news media.
The DNC never fully weighed the risks before settling on Kamala Harris as their 2024 nominee. The problems began long before her nomination. Joe Biden refused to step aside, and the party continued propping him up until a disastrous debate performance forced a last-minute rethink. When Harris was suddenly thrust into the spotlight, party leaders tried to patch the chaos with a massive war chest, hoping that money alone could stabilize the campaign. But it barely made a difference. The funding boost didn't fix the messaging, ease voter doubts, or rebuild trust. In the end, it came across as a rushed gamble with little clear path to retaining power.
And the fact that we're just getting to know Kamala isn't bad. It's great. Great for her, great for the country. People didn't used to get sick of the candidates because you barely ever saw them unless you happened to be standing at the back end of a train. But now we never stop seeing them. The winner in modern elections comes down to who we're less tired of. They're just constantly on us. TV, radio, the mail, on our phones, texting. Hey, Bill, Tim Walz here. You up? They're everywhere all the time. Jesus Christ, off. Let mommy put her purse down.
Here, Maher fires back at Harris defenders who argue that voters never had enough time to get to know her because of a short campaign. But Maher isn't buying it, and frankly, either should anyone. Harris had nearly $500 million at her disposal, a staggering budget by any standard. She poured huge sums into nonstop ads, celebrity endorsements, and meticulously staged appearances. A-list stars with millions of followers plastered her face and slogans across every corner of social media. Visibility wasn't the problem. If anything, it was overkill. Voters saw plenty of Kamala. Her messaging, branding, and symbolism were everywhere. The real issue, as Maher points out, is that people had grown exhausted by her long before Election Day.
Vice President Harris, in her new book, said it was, quote, recklessness for former President Biden's allies to leave the decision about running for re-election up to him and his family. Do you agree with her? Was it recklessness?
Look, I wasn't there, Kristen, on this, and I think the president, again, got us through COVID, ushered us through, brought the economy back from the edge. I think there's question about this, and I want to be very clear. On me talking about the MRI, ageism is a real thing. Ableism is a real thing that we need to be careful of with people. And I think Donald Trump made a cottage industry out of attacking Joe Biden's competency, and it seemed like that got reported a lot.
Here we go with the sidestepping again. The question was simple, yet Tim Walz twisted around it like he was auditioning for a political talent show. Kamala Harris had already laid her cards on the table, blaming Joe Biden's inner circle for leaving the decision to stay in the race entirely up to him, and by extension, his family. In her view, they should have acted sooner, taken responsibility, and spared the party the chaos that followed. Essentially, Harris pins a major part of her loss on Biden's delay and indecision. But instead of facing that head-on, Walz redirects the blame to Donald Trump, as if Trump orchestrated the Democrats' internal mess. It a textbook case of deflection, a convenient way to avoid admitting the dysfunction originated within their own ranks.
Now, whether that decision should have been made sooner, history will determine that. What I do know is that going forward, we need somebody in office who's actually going to tackle the things Americans need, whether it's about costs or whether it's about our national security needs and honoring those with our allies. And I think maybe there's a lesson to be learned from what happened with President Biden. If that's the case, it should certainly be applied right now to this president who is putting Americans at risk, is reckless, and is not doing what he's asked to do.
And here we go again with the predictable anti-Trump fixation. For some reason, commentators can't keep him out of the conversation, even when he's irrelevant. But did you catch the subtle slip in Tim Walz's remarks? While delivering his usual jab at Trump, he also quietly threw Joe Biden under the bus. When Walz suggested there a lesson to be learned from Biden, it wasn't praise, it was a critique, implying Biden mishandled the transition and should have acted sooner. In other words, Walz inadvertently echoed the growing Democratic critique that Biden's hesitation and slow decision-making contributed to the party's collapse. So while he tried to distract with another Trump mention, he ended up reinforcing the very criticism Harris and others have been raising all along.
Former Vice President Kamala Harris has left the door open to potentially run for office again. Do you still think she's the strongest person to run for president in 2028?
Well, I'm glad she's out there, and I'm glad a whole lot of other people are out there, because I think Donald Trump sucks up so much oxygen. We need to have the Democratic Party out on the field, the broad, inclusive Democratic Party, talking about making life more affordable, talking about protecting freedoms, and I think Kamala Harris does a wonderful job with that. If she chooses to run, that betters all of us. We will have the process. We'll go through. I'm sure there'll be a lot of folks throw their hat into the ring, but that's good, and we need to make sure that we're providing the alternative that America's asking for.
Now it's easy to see why Kamala Harris chose Tim Walz as her running mate. Like Harris, he a pro at sidestepping direct questions, treating honesty like a political minefield. When asked a simple yes or no about whether Harris would be a strong 2028 candidate, he couldn't give a straight answer. That hesitation speaks volumes. It suggests one of two things: either he doubts Harris's future viability, or he keeping the door open for the party's next rising star. I lean toward the former. Harris's 2024 stumble already dented her credibility, and whispers within the Democratic establishment hinted she'd be a weak contender in 2028. Walz knows this too. His dodge wasn't just caution, it was a quiet acknowledgement that the party is already looking beyond Harris, even if no one's ready to admit it aloud.
And I think she had a message last year that I'm proud of. I think, did it break through enough? Obviously not, but it's still a message that works, making sure that America is affordable for all, people feel included, and we tackle the toughest problem.
And that's exactly my point. Most Americans simply couldn't connect with Kamala Harris' message because it never reflected their everyday reality. It wasn't a question of disinterest or lack of exposure. She had ample interviews, rallies, televised statements, and national moments where all eyes were on her. Yet instead of delivering clear, grounded arguments, Harris often drifted into long stretches of confusing word salad and convoluted logic. Viewers didn't leave inspired, they left trying to decipher what she had just said. Maher critique goes deeper. Communication isn't just talking, it's making people feel understood. Harris frequently came across as detached, overly scripted, or caught in loops of vague rhetoric that aimed for profundity but landed as emptiness. Many Americans simply couldn't follow her explanations and eventually stopped trying. When a politician's message becomes a riddle, voters move on. Maher wasn't exaggerating for laughs, he was highlighting a real frustration Harris never managed to overcome.
What was the primary reason, do you think, that you lost?
There are many factors, I think, that played into the outcome of that election. But I think probably one of the biggest in my mind is we just didn't have enough time.
We didn't have enough time.
We didn't have enough time.
Oh, yeah.
And, one of the reasons I wrote the book is this is unprecedented. Think about this.
Yeah.
That there's a race for president of the United States. The current sitting president is running for re-election. 3.5 months from the election, he decides not to run. The sitting vice president then takes the mantle, running against a former president of the United States who had been running for 10 years with 107 days.
At this point, critics argue that Kamala Harris frequently adjusts her messaging to fit her campaign narrative. Her recent claim that Donald Trump had the edge as a former president doesn't hold up under scrutiny. Harris herself was the sitting vice president while running. If holding office grants a political advantage, she arguably had an even bigger one. The irony grows when you consider what she conveniently leaves out about her own tenure alongside the Biden administration. Critics point out that Democrats spent years politically targeting Trump with legal battles and relentless scrutiny, shaping the election landscape in the process. He was mocked, his fitness questioned, his supporters dismissed, and he was repeatedly painted as a national threat. Narratives were amplified, scandals magnified, and legal battles often dominated election season. For Harris to now suggest Trump enjoyed an unfair advantage is, at best, disingenuous. Critics see it as yet another example of shifting blame rather than taking responsibility for her own campaign missteps.
Another piece of what is unprecedented and a bit historical about that race, it is the closest presidential race in the 21st century in terms of the outcome.
Wow.
The closest.
You know, say that again, because he likes to say over and over again he's got a mandate.
And that's part of why I wrote this book, because history will talk about this race. It is part of American history. And it was important to me that when history is written, that my voice be present.
Sometimes it's hard not to wonder what the audience hears before applauding Kamala Harris, since she rarely offered anything truly deep or grounded. But that beside the point. Many argue that Trump's 2024 mandate had less to do with rhetoric and more to do with results. He captured 312 electoral votes to Harris' 226, and for the first time in 20 years, won the national popular vote. Beyond the numbers, his victory reflected shifting demographics and voting trends. Exit polls suggested he gained ground with several minority groups compared to previous runs, and drew support from new or returning voters frustrated by economic concerns like inflation and the rising cost of living. For many Americans, his win symbolized a rejection of the status quo: economic uncertainty, rising prices, and dissatisfaction with the party in power. That discontent, more than sheer admiration for Trump, helped turn the election into what many view as a mandate. The story is straightforward. Harris struggled to connect, communicate, and persuade voters. No amount of applause or celebrity endorsements could overcome that. Her message felt vague, her delivery confusing, and her campaign unfocused. Meanwhile, Trump leveraged a frustrated electorate, economic anxieties, and shifting voter coalitions to secure a decisive win. His victory wasn't merely a political comeback, it reflected a broader rejection of the country's current direction. The contrast between clarity and confusion, momentum and mismanagement, ultimately decided the outcome. No post-election spin can change that reality. And with that, we wrap up today's video. If you enjoyed it, hit the like button and subscribe for more content like this.